Next item is a presentation from Kristine Morris, the Assistant Deputy Secretary for Ecosystem Restoration for DEP on innovative solutions in water supply.
Would you like me to sit here or?
You're welcome if you want to stand at the front. And I also have a clicker if you want to be in charge of that. You just need to point at that computer at the beginning, at the front of the. You'll just want to point the clicker at that one. Yeah. Whatever you prefer.
My name is Kristine Morris. I am the Assistant Deputy Secretary in our group called Ecosystems Restoration at DEP. And I was going to provide a little bit of an overview of the context of kind of our water supply picture at a statewide level, with trying to give some local perspective as well. And then I'll talk about some of our, as Jennifer alluded to, some of the what people call drought-proof systems, or ways to make you more resilient to a drought into the future.
Hasn't it?
Doing it wrong.
Oh, is it not moving? Oh, you know what? Let me look.
Is it?
Oh, it would help if it's on. Sorry about that.
There you go.
All right, so I was going to provide some overall context about who Florida's water users are, and I will talk about the different sectors of water uses that we kind of deal with in a permitting context and planning context. But really and truly, the users of water in Florida are the 23 million citizens, the 143 million visitors, and the 9.7 million acres of agricultural lands in Florida. Water use in Florida is regulated by the state's 5 water management districts, which were created back in 1972, some a little bit earlier as kind of in a different form. And then these boundaries were created and designed to reflect surface water boundaries, which you can kind of see most evidently in that piece of South Florida that goes up the Kissimmee River into the center of the state. So in order to manage our water resources, we require that the water management districts evaluate water supplies every 5 years through the regional water supply planning process. So as part of that process, they identify if there are any water constraints where existing sources of water are not adequate to supply water for all existing and future reasonable beneficial uses, and to sustain the natural resources and related natural systems for that planning period. A planning period is 20 years, and we update that every 5 years. We do that so that we can have those projections for future purposes. It can take years to develop a water supply, even a traditional water supply, and a decade or more to develop a kind of a larger scale project. So by planning 20 years in advance, we can be assured that we have the ability to have the water supplies that we need when the time comes. In those water supply plans, each of the districts will not only identify the water use projections, but they will look at the sources of water that may be available to meet all those water use needs as well. The estimated statewide 2020 water use was about 6.3 billion gallons of water a day. The statewide 2040 water demand projection is estimated to be around 7.2 billion gallons of water a day. That's about a 14% growth that is attributed in large part to a projected by the Economic and Demographic Research Group of the legislature, estimated to be about a 24% population growth over the next, that was a 20-year projection. As you can see, public supply, which is your water from utilities, is both the largest water user and the one projected to grow the most. You'll actually see that it crossed agriculture sometime between 2015 and 2020 as the largest water user in the state. Previous to that, agriculture was always the largest water user. I will note that these numbers you see at the end and the numbers I've cited are not what we actually project to withdraw when the time comes. The whole purpose of water supply planning is to come up with what those sources are and to implement water conservation measures to drive those numbers down and to switch sources to a source that is sustainable for the natural system. So to put those numbers that I just gave in perspective, this is the state's historic water use. I wanted to show you historic water use from USGS. This has been collected since 1970. The water management districts have worked with USGS for decades to help compile these figures. What these show are 1 year estimated water use snapshots every 5 years. So in between each of those 5 years, you would see a zigzag based off of hydrologic conditions. But we are currently awaiting the 2020 data. They take typically about 5 years to put out the previous 5 year data. And we are still awaiting the 2020. The 2025 report takes a while to compile. So we do expect the 2020 figure to come in soon. And in which case we can update this graph. So in 1970, at the start of the data collection in Florida, that's actually 2 years prior to when the state of Florida had a water use permitting program. The state was estimated to have freshwater withdrawals estimated at 5.6 billion gallons of water a day. 5 years later, it was 1 billion gallons more, and it peaked in 2000 with an estimated withdrawal of 8.2 billion gallons of water a day. You might recall that our 20-year projection is not that high anymore. So the implementation of water conservation measures and alternative water supply sources has really helped make this downward trend a reality. So I am going to talk a little bit about kind of what has been on everyone's mind lately, a drought. It doesn't feel like in the last couple days. I got caught outside yesterday and got absolutely drenched because I did not pack an umbrella, which is something you should apparently do in a drought. So let's talk about some of the things that do influence our water use. We have had dry weather conditions. They have persisted and they have been in some areas severe. So what this graph shows, this is a statewide graph. And it shows drought since 2000, so the past 26 years. And the darker the color, the worse the drought. The higher the peak, the larger the percentage of Florida in drought. This is all data from the US Drought Monitor. So what this essentially shows is how widespread and how severe a drought is. I do want to acknowledge, even in those times where drought is not everywhere, where it is not a high peak, or it is not severe, if you are the one being impacted by drought, it is severe. For an agricultural producer to experience a minor, not persistent drought at the wrong time of year, it can be devastating. So this is not meant to be whether or not drought is bad for individuals or an area. This is really just to look at trends over the course of the state and look at whether or not it is widespread and severe at a statewide level. So we in Florida have not really experienced a widespread severe drought in a while. Our last one was 2012. You can see though that this was kind of an elongated period without those really dry weather conditions. The 2000 to 2001 timeframe was exceptionally severe. That kind of did repeat a little bit in 2007 and then again in 2012. So we do know rains will come. You know, rains have come a little bit, and we have seen some relief to drought conditions in many areas of the state. But that does not mean that we have seen a replenishment of our water storage. And there is a difference between drought and water storage. So I wanted to talk briefly about that because it's part of planning for your water supply. The drought is largely a meteorological effect. It might include things like soil conditions and things like that, but it's largely a meteorological effect. Is it raining? Is it not raining? Water shortage is an evaluation of the water supply within the system. For this region, that can include an evaluation of reservoir levels, aquifer levels, riverine flows, and more. And so when you are in a water shortage situation, the water management districts do have the authority to issue water shortage orders. These typically begin as voluntary warnings and then can become requirements. Typically, they focus on outdoor irrigation initially, and they can extend beyond a meteorological drought as the system recovers from that rainfall deficit. This is sometimes hard to communicate to citizens when they see it's raining and they see the rains have returned. Maybe their streets are flooded and we're still telling them we are still in a water shortage. And that's because it can take time to replenish the systems that have that reduced storage. So how do we meet our water demands? And that was just kind of context for, some of the factors that affect how you want to plan for your water supply future. So we typically meet most of our water demands with what we call traditional sources. For most of the state, this is fresh groundwater. And it does include a lot of surface waters, especially when you get into the South Florida areas. Many people think, and so I kind of put on the slide here that, this will continue to meet our water demands, but it is constrained in some areas. And so there's often the talk of, well, it's constrained, it's running out. That's not really what is happening. That traditional source is going to continue to be used to sustain existing uses. Where it becomes constrained is that in meeting those future needs, we would anticipate, if we allowed it to be used for that purpose, that you might see impacts. And so I use the word constrained so as to not get a picture of it is, running out. The aquifer is not necessarily quote empty. It will continue to replenish with rainfall and provide a significant amount of our water supply. However, we must use alternative water supplies in those areas where one, the water supply is available, the alternative supply is available, so that we can keep the traditional source as healthy for and as robust as possible. And then we must use it where it is constrained. And there are regulations in place in many areas in this area where we do contain or we do restrict water use from those areas. So the number one source of alternative water supply in this state is reclaimed water. This started to be highly used in the late 1990s, going into 2000s, where it became less of a method for disposal, and people started seeing it as a true asset. They started charging for it. Before that, they didn't charge for it. And so you saw a lot of offsets and a lot of demands being met by reclaimed water in this state. And we will talk a little bit about aquifer recharge as well. Brackish water is a significant opportunity to meet demands, particularly in the South and Central Florida areas, and I do have a couple examples of that. Reservoirs and surface waters still continue to meet demands throughout the state. There's aquifer recharge, which allows for continued groundwater withdrawals while protecting those natural systems. So you're essentially crediting the system, adding to that storage so that withdrawals can be made even when absent that recharge, that water supply might be too constrained to provide the ability to withdraw water from it. And then finally, I want to talk about water conservation, which can help curb those demands. So all those lines you saw kind of at an incline, you really want to flatten them as much as possible and reduce, in large part, per capita water use, but also from other sources as well. And so water conservation remains a really critical part to meeting our future water demands and helps us eliminate the possibility or really delay the possibility of having to develop more expensive alternative water supply source. So the first kind of example I wanted to give, and if you cannot tell from the shape, this is in Gainesville. That is a gatorhead. So this was a 264-acre wetland park that was really, at its whole, is really a large-scale restoration project. What this project is built for is to rehydrate 1,300 acres of Payne's Burn and recharge the Florida aquifer. It begins with highly treated reclaimed water and local basic stormwater, which is then further treated in this gator-shaped wetland. It has become a thriving habitat of birds, butterflies, alligators, and Florida cracker horses. They've reported finding, which is kind of wild. The park features more than 3.5 miles of crushed gravel trails and boardwalks, viewing platforms, educational signage, and tours, and they have about 80,000 visitors annually to this wetland park. The Gainesville City Commission approved this project in 2007, and they began construction in 2012. The couple of things I wanted to talk about this was the amount of forethought and planning that went into a project like this that I think is really valuable for communities to look at. This project is not built to solve one issue. It is looking at the system as a whole, looking at kind of like it is the one water concept. You're looking at multiple issues. You're looking at Paynes Prairie needing rehydration. You're looking at the availability of a really high quality water source in order to achieve that. You're bringing together partners that typically may not always naturally overlap, or they would, but they don't always naturally seek to solve each other's problems. But when you bring them together, you can achieve really amazing things. This one kind of, I think, proves it just by their visitors annually. They've won awards for the amount of birding. Audubon is out there giving tours to people because they've had record bird rate. And so when you're able to bring together multiple partners, you can really achieve some really, really beautiful results and really successful results. This has become a significant community asset, I'm sure, especially during game weekends. So the next one I wanted to talk about is seawater. So this is the one I hear the most about when we're in a drought. Is, well, we must need desal. We must, turn to the ocean. I can guarantee you the ocean will not run out of seawater. So you're not really dealing with a limitation in source. There is, well, I'll talk a little bit about what seawater desal or the use of reverse osmosis is first. So it is, well, let's first talk about how it becomes potable. It starts with a pretreatment process that can remove all the constituents that come in with the seawater. And after that treatment occurs, the seawater is pushed through membranes, so through a process known as reverse osmosis, where very high pressure forces force it through those membranes and remove, or rather separate the fresh water from a lot of the minerals like the salts. The size of each RO membrane pore is about 0.001 microns, which is about 1/100,000. I can't even say that. 1/100,000 of a diameter of a human hair. So these are tiny, 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 tiny pores in order to push fresh water through, but not let salt and other minerals through. So what is left behind is a concentrate that must be properly disposed of. And on the other side is the fresh water. There is exactly one seawater desal plant in Florida that is operated to meet daily demands. That is Tampa Bay Water's desal plant. There are 2 other facilities in the Florida Keys. Those are used for emergency backup only. So those are not meeting their daily demands. And nationwide, as of 2018, when Congress last counted and provided me a useful report, there were only 13 facilities in the United States that did seawater desal. So when people think about, well, we could just do desal, I think you can see by the numbers alone that that is a difficult, it is a difficult process. It tends to be one of the more expensive options. Yes, it is generally drought proof, but it is, in Florida, maybe not always the most necessary step for all users, but it does really diversify an organization's opportunities to meet their demands in various times. And so I think that is why Tampa Bay Water has this, right? They have a very diverse water supply, so they can meet those demands. So it is a costly alternative water supply. It is a lot of maintenance. Those membranes have to get replaced on a regular interval. But what this has taught us is how, I have an intervening slide, but it is how it taught us how to look at and treat brackish water. But before I get to brackish water, I really have to explain why that option is also not available for everyone in every location. So I wanted to share a little bit about the Florida aquifer systems. So we have a number of aquifer systems. A lot of times we want to think of, we have the Florida, that is the largest. That's the one at the bottom in blue. It covers all of the state of Florida, and it serves 9.2 million people. So an enormous amount of people rely on the Florida aquifer system, but there are other aquifer systems. In fact, South Florida in particular utilizes a lot of the intermediate aquifer and superficial aquifer. So there are two other aquifers. They're kind of a little bit on that top map. So there's the sand and gravel aquifer, which is in the Florida Panhandle. And then there's the Biscayne Bay aquifer as well, which is just in southeast Florida. And it does serve a significant population as well. And then within the Floridan, there are confinements and there are confined layers, and then there are areas that are unconfined. We have found brackish water in confined aquifers in the lower Floridan aquifer. So essentially the Floridan aquifer is split in some areas and it is confined in some areas, such that you can withdraw water from the lower Floridan aquifer and it does not adversely impact the upper Floridan aquifer, which is our traditional source. In some areas that is brackish, in other areas it is still fresh, but it makes an available source. Lower, there are some areas of the state where there is no confinement whatsoever, and any withdrawal from a lower aquifer would impact the upper aquifer. And so you really don't have that source available to help you meet demands, because it's going to impact the upper just as it would. So there's no benefit. So I say that because a lot of folks are now going, well, you just need to go to the lower Floridan aquifer, or you just need to tap a brackish water source. And in some areas that is a possibility. In other areas, just because of the nature of the aquifer system, it is not a possibility. They would still impact the same freshwater source that we are identifying as constrained. However, one of those areas that is confined is in Polk County. Central Florida Water Initiative area was identified back in the early 2000s. It went by a different name back then, but a number of stakeholders came together to identify constraints in the Polk, Lakeland, and then going up to like Osceola, Orange County, et cetera, Seminole. And so they came to work together to say we need to identify alternative water supply sources for this region to meet our demands. A rule was put in place by DEP back in, I want to say 2020, that allowed individual water users to go to their 2025 demands from the upper Floridan and no further. And so they now, to meet future demands, they have to look at alternative sources. So one of those sources is the brackish lower Floridan aquifer in a confined aquifer system, which Polk County has done. So what I like about highlighting this project is that, once again, kind of like the Sweetwater branch in Gainesville, this is not one man out alone solving his problems, which is fine. Where you can solve your own problem, that's great. But here, there are 15 member governments who came together to identify an alternative source and develop that source. They're not alone. There are 41 brackish water facilities that South Florida Water Management District has identified in operation in their district alone. And so brackish water is a very valuable source, and it is nowhere near as costly as seawater. So, I had a good stat. I need to get it. So seawater ranges between 19,000 and 35,000 milligrams per liter of chloride concentrate. Fresh water is between 500. It's typically less than 250, but it's certainly less than 500. Brackish is somewhere between 500 and 10,000. So it is, even at its saltiest, it is really nowhere near the salt concentration of seawater. So it is significantly cheaper to treat brackish water than it is to treat seawater. So it represents a really valuable alternative source. And it's just available in portions of the state where they do have confinement. So the last example I wanted to provide is on water conservation. And there's often a misconception that water conservation is really small and minute. When you see the numbers, you're like, we save 15,000 gallons. And then when I tell you, like, we're using 6 point whatever billion gallons of water, you just go like, what? I don't see where we're making a difference. And we are absolutely making a difference, because by user, that adds up to enormous quantities of water. There's also sometimes the misconception that we have done it all. We've switched to low flow toilets. We've done the things that need to get done. But we are finding that, one, technology has opened doors that we didn't even dream about 10 years ago. and two, that there's still a lot to get done. Water conservation year round, because I'm going to bring this back to drought a little bit. Water conservation year round can make our water supply more resilient. And during a drought, the technology, the devices are already in place to ensure that we are using less water. So by doing water conservation all the time, during times of drought, you are able to stretch your supplies even further and to sustain that water storage as long as possible. Programs really should work together. There are some that have identified, really proven successful methods, and there are some that are looking at innovative solutions. So I wanted to talk about another one. I actually saw, I don't know if any of you guys know Amelia Brown with Tampa Bay Water. She's phenomenal. If you've not worked with her and you were interested in water conservation, she is certainly one to call because she's very passionate about water conservation. So Tampa Bay Water has a WaterWise program, and it just to kind of illustrate how successful over 6 years, this program has saved 1.1 million gallons of water a day. That's just in 6 years. And that's recent. That's not historic. And one of the things that Tampa Bay Water, because they are a wholesaler, they're a little bit different than a typical utility, but they have focused on water conservation for multifamily dwellings. And that is accounted for about 75% of that 1.1 million gallons of water a day saved. That is not projected water, that is real water that they have counted off their meters. So that is not just an estimate. So this graph, oh, it's very tiny, I apologize for that. This graph shows how they targeted, this is just one assisted living facility. They installed a kind of more innovative device at this assisted facility that does a couple things. It's a toilet retrofit device, so they're not replacing toilets. Those can get kind of more expensive when you're doing a multifamily dwelling. It's a device you put inside the toilet tank, and it does two things. One, it reduces the amount per flush. So it reduced it. So this particular facility was a 1.6 gallon per flush, and they dropped it to, I think, 0.8. So they dropped it essentially in half. But in addition, what this does, and this is really valuable for certain types of facilities, like an assisted living facility, is if there is a leak, it shuts the water off. So that leak cannot continue. That's really helpful where you don't have the toilet's not being monitored frequently, right? So you might have an area where people don't go that often, or maybe it's only open on weekends, or you may have a community that is just not able to report, hey, this is leaking until it's very late. So it has a couple advantages for the assisted living facility as well to prevent leaks, damage, etc. So this device was installed, and they saw this one I think was a 46% reduction in their water use overnight. They did it at two other facilities. One showed a 69% reduction in their overall water use. You're imagining one facility dropping their water use by 70% essentially in a single installation. And then they did do another facility which had a lower gallon per flush initially, but they still dropped that one by 8%. So I will take 8% all day for an inexpensive program to save water. So you multiply this kind of success and you multiply it out to other facilities. You can kind of see how big a difference water conservation can make when it is targeted, thoughtful, implemented, and really embracing kind of new technologies as they come along. This is again just to illustrate why this is so successful. This is to prove that water conservation makes a massive difference. So we used to see per capita well over 160 gallons per person, and we are now closer to 100. So we have dropped a huge percentage of our per person water use, even as our population, as you can see, has grown substantially. This is also USGS data. We are still waiting for their 2020 report, so I will update it when they do that. And then finally, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about grants, because that is a program that we very much support. So pretty soon, probably in the next week or so, we will be updating the floridadep.gov/funding website. We do this pretty soon around the signing of the budget or after the passage of the budget. So right now we're in the cooling off period. So we do expect a budget to be passed shortly. I think Friday will be the day. Yeah. And so with that, we will update that website so you can see every single grant and every single program that DEP got from the legislature that fiscal year. In addition, we then will open up our grants portal. So protectingfloridatogether.gov/grants is our grants portal. It will open July 1st with any grant programs we were provided. We've been calling it a one-stop shop, but it is now going to truly be a one-stop shop. We're going to have everything from our water projects to resilience and beaches to we are now adding parks and recreation. So a lot of communities, when we talk about the One Water, it offered a lot of community amenities. Our grants for water typically cannot pay for the boardwalk, but we do have grants that might be able to. And so now it's all in one place for you to be able to navigate, find the grants that your community can apply for, and submit those before the deadline. And all of the projects I talked about today are eligible for that. So water conservation is eligible. Any type of alternative water supply development is an eligible project. So with that, I will take any questions you guys want to.
Yeah, hi, Joe Kilrain, Cape Coral. Listen, fantastic report. Your resources are unbelievable. That's the most precise and concise technical analysis I heard on Florida's water in a long time. I come from Cape Coral. We down here have a confined brackish area. Just a couple of points. Desalinization plants using some seawater sources. I would just mention that there's a plant in San Diego that has probably the most efficient pumping capacity, or about 50 gallon per 50 million gallon per day facility, and they've optimized their electrical uptake so that they use RO with the expanded RO carriages on it, and they're probably 18-inch diameter carriages for the RO. Here in Cape Coral, our experience has been that we're able to go down to the brackish aquifer. We got the mid Hawthorne, and we go into the lower Hawthorne, and basically we go down about 700 feet to pull up the brackish. We have 2 RO plants, nominal capacity about 40 million gallons per day. We're expanding by another 20. And our recycle system is very sophisticated here. So with the capability of doing that, it is a wonderful source of water that gets you out of the surface water dependence. Some of the issues that we ran into here was we're tapping into the cheap water in the surface water, the top aquifer, and we're depleting that so quickly. And that's why our RO plants are really performing well for us right now. I happen to be a chemical engineer, used to build chemical plants and refineries all worldwide. And RO is really the technology to go into in the future if you have that capability of tapping into something that is, unusable by other sources. And most, as you mentioned, most of the aquifers in the lower area of the Florida state are confined with brackish levels, both east and west coast. So it's a good benefit. And I really can relate to your presentation and love to follow up with you and offer our opportunities for Cape Coral to, to have some joint experiences there. So thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, and so the San Diego facility is the largest facility in the United States right now. I've heard Texas is wanting to outdo them, which is funny. Worldwide, those are kind of on the bigger side. The biggest ones we see for seawater desal are, of course, out in the Middle East. They have endless quantities. Sure. They just generate their own oil and power, so they don't have that cost as part of their O&M. But yeah,
I actually worked on one in Qatar and saw it way back when. So,
but there are
I agree.
Yeah, there's advancements all the time, making it less and less costly, and it should be evaluated as a source. I mean, it should be looked at as a potential source. It just might be that there is a less expensive source, and that is what the water supply planning process really is designed to do. It looks at all the potential sources, And then it says, these are the ones that are most probable for communities to move to. And so it would identify something like, we believe that this aquifer is confined, that it has available brackish water. And so the districts might, test it, or a water user might, go do some aquifer performance testing to make sure that that confinement is there. And there have been times where we've looked at the lower Floridan and we found it is fresh. It is still confined. So there are, there's a lot of opportunity in the different confined layers of the aquifer. And I think it's, that planning process, I think, is a really valuable opportunity to kind of explore what those are. And the districts have a very transparent process. They have multiple public meetings in that process. So I would encourage everyone to participate in those.
Janine Polk, City of Punta Gorda. So what we found out is that we had some serious meter readers that were not working correctly. And a lot of people were losing water. I mean, a lot of this is about, that you were talking about earlier, conservation is educating all of our population. And a lot of people are learning that if I had a water meter that worked properly, so what we're doing is we're getting all new water meters. And these water meters are supposed to be like a smart AMI system that's set up so that people can see in real time, oh, I'm up north, but I have water running, what's going on? And they can actually turn it off. So those are some things that, could be implemented that they are costly. We did have to ask for funding from the state. And supposedly, fingers crossed, we're getting $1 million towards that. We're also writing grants, things like that. But it's another thing that I think cities sometimes overlook. If your water meters don't work properly, you're probably losing a lot of water that way.
The DP, we do have, it's not even a pilot project anymore, but we still call it the Water Loss Pilot Program. It is run through our SRF team. It allows for communities, in particular rural communities, to work with potable water to essentially perform an audit according to AWRA's standards and identify where they might be seeing water loss. Sometimes that is at the meter, sometimes it's elsewhere, but it allows them to target, this is your most cost-effective way to address water loss. And it lets them target those areas. Because that's a really, just identifying where that water loss is occurring over a historic system that's sprawling is really difficult. So there are methods that have been developed. That team is really great about working with communities. That is a program DEP pays for the rural water side of it. And then of course, especially for AMI meters, those are eligible for water conservation grants. They tend to be a little bit difficult to compete because they are stopping water loss and really about identifying kind of the lost revenue associated with not really capturing what that is doing. But where community, like when filling out that application, where a community can identify, like we expect to reduce our water loss by a certain percentage based off of this, that is eligible. And then we have seen, especially when moving to really smart AMI systems, we have seen a lot of communities embracing the ability to, like my boss the other day got a text from his utility going, something's running. Like it doesn't normally run at 2 p.m. in the afternoon. So what's going on? And he knew, yeah, he had a leaky toilet in his downstairs bath. So there are a lot of really great, that's where I was talking about like these amazing technologies that were not around 10 years ago. They would just text somebody and go, your meter's been running for like 4 hours, not big, but like enough that it's concerning. This is also really valuable for irrigation systems. Many people, you might notice a sprinkler head, although you might not, right? So, but a sprinkler head's at least noticeable because you'll see water coming up. Broken pipes under the ground, people do not notice. They do not know that that's happening until they step on their ground and then maybe it's a little mushy, but how many people walk over all their grass? And so that's been a really helpful way to identify leaks in in-ground irrigation systems. So we do recognize that, particularly the AMI systems, which can help people identify leaks and get those repaired, can save a substantial amount of water.
Diana Gigaldo, City of Fort Myers. So we've kind of started implementing this new technology. We had a bunch of meters that were replaced that were smart meters that they weren't accurately accounting for the water. And so now that we have to do a lot of the updates, we're able to have that technology to notify people. Now, how do you counter for Earth Day, that was like a whole thing. We were trying to put initiatives together. I'm the environmentalist of my council. And when we talked about water conservation and we have a drought, the comeback from staff was, well, utilities, you pay for utilities. If people are not using water, then we have less revenue. While I understand that, we have a responsibility with our resources, local resources, and that's part of our commitment to our community. So how do you counter that? Because I'm not gonna give up on that.
I would say that many utilities recognize the cost of alternative supplies and much prefer the cost of water conservation. Water conservation, yes, they may not collect as much rate theoretically, but they still have to develop these alternative water supplies. Some of these are very, very, very costly. It's not just costly for the capital cost to build it, it's very expensive to run. So even when you're dealing with brackish water and you're using those reverse osmosis membranes, even though it's not on the scale of seawater costs, you are still having a substantial increase in your O&M cost. And so many utilities, I think if that is a conversation coming from the utility, that's one thing. But often people make that assumption and they're forgetting the cost of the O&M and the capital costs. Utilities are still wanting to, especially city-owned utilities, but I would say even privately owned utilities, they're still wanting to be economical, cost-effective. And that really comes from implementing water conservation, because water conservation dollar per gallon is going to be the cheapest thing that we can implement.
Any other questions, comments?
Oh, and I will add to that. There are requirements for water conservation in their permit as well. So it's not that they just get to choose whether they do water conservation or they don't do water conservation. There are requirements for water conservation. And in many areas of the state, we now see actually something that SwiftMud implemented, which is a kind of like a per capita limit. We do have those in many other areas of the state now because it was very successful.
Question. What happens with the byproduct of desalination, the salt and the minerals? How is that disposed? Is it used in some sort? How is that?
It has to be disposed of. We have seen some innovative businesses come out and say that they would like to essentially commoditize, is that a word? Commoditize that water because it does have a lot of minerals in it. But I don't know if the technology is there. I don't know if the businesses are quite there yet, but we have seen a lot of people come and talk about that. Right now it is disposed of. It can be disposed of in a number of ways. A lot of it is with a lot of blending. And so you can dispose of it if you blend it so that it kind of essentially gets to background. Or you can dispose of it, I think some deep well. Yeah. So It just depends on your situation, whether or not you can, but it's part of that cost of both operating it and building the infrastructure to address it. And that is part of a permit.
Anybody else? Anyone online have any questions or comments? Okay, thank you so much, Kristine.